checking on the possibility of reducing the light up here, which is causing a bit of a shine. Just for your information, if you do not know, this, as well as many of the more recent meetings, have been videotaped. And just so you're aware of that. And these videotapes are being made available on the member website to anyone who wishes to see a meeting that they may have missed, or particularly for the benefit of those who, and a large number of them really, who are members but do not live in the area, but would want to, I think, see some of the things that we're doing at general meetings. So, welcome to the final meeting of this spring session. We will not be meeting now again until September. Just to very briefly let you know that September is going to be a rather special meeting for the branch, because we're going to be celebrating on the September meeting the 35th anniversary of the existence of the Essex County branch of OGS. And the members who have been part of this for a while are putting together a program which will, I think, provide a lot of history, background, and growth of the branch to where we are today. So I think you'll find that a very interesting meeting. Just to say as well that one of the things, again, that we have been doing all spring to help our members is to provide some information about various resources in the Essex County area. So if your ancestors grew up or lived in a particular part of the county, you might find it of interest to do some research and visit some of the resources that are available in the different parts of the county. And we've done that for a number of different resources that are available. Tonight, we are very privileged and pleased to have Jennifer MacLeod, who is going to represent the Marsh Collection in Amherstburg, and tell us briefly an overview of what you could expect when you go to the collection there, what kind of information you would be able to find that may help you in your family history research. So, Jennifer?
Well, I will leave these brochures and newsletters up here, and just to grab one later. I apologize, I don't have any sort of really high-tech exhibit or PowerPoint or anything. It's just me talking, I'm afraid, and I'll be fairly brief, but certainly any questions that any of you have, please feel free to ask as we go along. The Marsh Collection, has anyone in this room been to the Marsh Collection? Oh, okay, very good. Does anyone send regular emails to the Marsh Collection? So we have been there. This October will be our 20th anniversary. So on October 1st of 1994, myself and our administrator, Eleanor Geniak, were sitting in an empty rental space. We had a dining room table and 6 chairs. We had boxes of files, boxes of books, and that was all that we had at all. So we literally started from scratch. Now, the boxes of files came from the actual Marsh Collection. And most of you probably are familiar enough with the county to know the Amherstburg Echo. And the Marsh family owned and operated the Echo for a total of 80 years altogether, between Arthur, the father, and John and Helen Marsh, his son and daughter. They owned it right up until 1981, when they sold it to John James. And at that point in time, John and Helen were in their early 80s, and because they loved Amherstburg so much and were so interested in the community and the history of the community, over the years, people would bring them stuff, photos and artifacts and just little tidbits of Amherstburg history because they knew they were interested. So fast forward to 1981, they've now sold the business, retired from the newspaper, and they have this collection of historical things and they have no idea what to do with it. So Dick Thrasher, who was a very close friend of theirs and a lawyer, talked them into setting up a nonprofit foundation called the Marsh Collection Society that would operate a research center based on their historical collection. The one thing that they insisted on was that the research center not be opened and nothing be done with it until after they had passed away. So Helen died in 1986 and John died in 1993, and we opened in 1994. We really didn't have a huge vision at the time. We didn't know where we were going to go. We didn't know what people were going to need and what people were going to want and what people were going to ask for when they came in. So we just kind of started, we bought the furniture, we bought the pens and the staplers and the hole punches and filing cabinets, and we just started going through files, pulling out photographs, cataloging them, putting things in order, getting books on bookshelves and cataloged and that kind of thing. Now, the Marsh Collection deals with all aspects of Amherstburg's history. So buildings and people and service clubs and schools and churches, anything to do with Amherstburg, we probably have a file on it. We really had no intention of getting into genealogy. That was not in our mandate, that was not in our vision at the beginning at all. However, Eleanor had been doing genealogies for herself, and then, as you all know, it morphs into, oh, well, you did your family tree? Can you just help me with mine? And over the years, she had amassed 2 cabinets full of family files. So what would happen is someone would come to town, and they would find the library, or they'd find the town hall, or the Chamber of Commerce, and they'd say, I'm here to do family tree research. My great-grandfather was born in Amherstburg. And the person there would say, inevitably, oh, you need to talk to Eleanor, and you can find her at the Marsh Collection. So they would show up at the Marsh Collection, and they would say, my great-grandfather was Xavier Meloche, and blah, 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 and Eleanor would say, okay, and she'd run home, 3 blocks away, grab her Meloche file, and come back. And after this happened for months and months and months and months and months, Eleanor said, maybe I should just bring those filing cabinets here. And so she did. And so that is actually why we became so well known for doing Amherstburg genealogy. It was mainly Eleanor as the magnet. And because it was obviously what people wanted, we were quite evidently filling a void there. So we just kind of, went with it and expanded on it, and kind of one of our focus points became genealogy. So that's why we are what we are. We are definitely more than genealogy, but that is a big part of what we do. Now, at the beginning, because we track our visitor statistics, and at the beginning, probably 85% of the researchers that came or emailed or phoned were genealogists. At this point in time, it's probably only about 65%. And I think there's 2 reasons for that. One is people are becoming aware that we do other things, so people that are interested in the history of their house or the history of the Knights of Columbus or whatever are finding us now. And the other thing is, with computers and Ancestry and all these things that are now available, I think a lot more people are doing it from home and don't need to necessarily come right to us. So the proportion of researchers who are genealogists is changing over time. And that's fine too. So we do focus on Amherstburg, Anderton, and Malden, on the tri-communities. Of course, as you all know, because you all do Essex County genealogy, you can't make a limit on a township line and say that's as far as we go, because people were mobile. Malden people went back and forth to Colchester, and Anderton people went back and forth to Sandwich West. So we do expand out into other areas of the county as well, but most of our information, most of our focus is on Amherstburg and Anderton and Malden townships. So what you might find when you come in, and again, these brochures here list what we have, and it's also on our website. Usually someone would come in, we would start them with the file. So we have, I would guess, close to 1,000 family files. We probably have a file for every major and minor family in the tri-community. Some files have 2 pieces of paper in them. Some files, like for example the Bondi file, are this thick. So it's really miscellaneous what might be in there. There may be a family chart that Eleanor or someone else has done. There may be obituaries, there may be printouts from census records, there may be photocopies of wills. Every file is completely different, and you really never know what you might find. It's very miscellaneous. So it's just kind of like the fun and the challenge of what family you're doing and how much information we have. Then from the file, we can start, we would sit somebody down with a chart, and we always insist you start with yourself and you go back one generation at a time, because people want to just pop right back into their great-great-grandfather, and it just doesn't work that way, as you all know. So we do try and get them, on a visual. And we deal with a lot of people that are truly beginners. We deal with a lot of people who have been doing this for years. So there's a wide range of how much information people already have, how much they know, how much they understand. So sometimes people sit, they look through the file, they don't say a word, they're happy, and other times we're literally sitting beside them for 2 hours and walking them through it. Both are fine. That's absolutely fine, and that's what we do. So we have things like the transcribed church records. Mostly what we use are the microfilms of the Amherstburg Echo, which start in November of 1874. And the Echo actually just closed a year and a half ago, so it had a huge long run. And obituaries are, of course, a gold mine, because a lot of them just tell a person's life story, which is fantastic. So we are in the Echo and the microfilms constantly. Now with Ancestry, it's great because if somebody's there and they're looking for, say, a birth registration, I can just pop on the computer and usually find it in 2 seconds, which is fabulous, as opposed to the 2 months it used to take to order microfilms in from the Archives of Ontario. Now it's instant, it's fabulous. So we don't have a computer that you could come in and use Ancestry, but if you tell me what you're looking for, one of us will just pop on ours and have a look for you. That's not a problem. Census indexes, we have them on paper. Again, we use Ancestry for that as well. Certain churches that are local, we have some books that are transcribed by the OGS or by the French Society, and others that have been transcribed by us or someone like us. We're also pretty good at being able to forward you somewhere else. So if someone comes in and their family is mostly Colchester South, we would definitely recommend that they go to Ayers and Harrow as well. We work quite a bit back and forth with Ayers, which is great. If we have a question that we think they can answer better, we certainly would put somebody onto them as well. So that's what we do. That's what we've got. Are there any questions? Oh, I should say we're open. Right now we're open Tuesday to Friday from 10 till 4. That may change. We're having some staffing changes this summer, so I'm not exactly sure if those hours are going to stay consistent or not. So if you do decide to come down, just pop us a phone call first and just make sure that will be open. Yeah.
You said that you can research like a birth record.
Need more light to get the
Is
person.
that for anywhere in Ontario?
Do you need more light than that?
On Ancestry, yes, we can, because that's an Ontario database, so yeah.
I'm wondering if because she's just in the shadow.
Death is the same in the marriage registration.
I'm going to see if I can get these ones on
When
and
we
those
were
ones
in
on.
Ireland, we were told to get more detailed information about ancestors there. We needed to get their, their previous generation, not previous, their.
Oh, the next generation, yeah.
More detail, like our death certificates might have more information. We need more information.
Right, like a county in Ireland, right.
Before they could give us more information in Ireland, so we kind of thought there because we didn't know where to go.
That does make sense. I think it would help if you knew at least a county that they came from in
Yeah.
Ireland. Much like Ontario, and we do get people, we get emails, My great-grandmother supposedly was born in Canada. Can you help us?
Well, we were told even in Ireland, if they say they're from County Clare, they might not be. They might be from County Kerry.
Gotcha. Just across the street.
Yeah, they're across the road. They're across the road.
Phone number. Phone number? It's on the brochure as well. It'll be right on the front, 736-9191. And our website is marshcollection.org.
Jennifer, thank you very, very much.
Oh, you're welcome.
It's good to have a very good overview of this, and as I said, people who have ancestry in that area, I'm sure will find it a very valuable collection. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
We appreciate it.
Even if you don't have ancestors in the Amherstburg corner of Essex County, if you're down in Amherstburg, just pop in. We do changing exhibits all the time and lots of stuff to look at. So you are more than welcome to come in even if you're not after genealogy.
Great. Thank you. And please, don't forget to take brochures at the end of the session, for sure. Okay, second presentation this evening. And we're very pleased to have with us Dr. Daniel MacLeod, and as it says here, Center of Scottish Studies at the University of Guelph. And I have a Scottish background, and I went to a genealogy session up in Waterloo about 2 years ago, and one of the people from the Center for Scottish Studies at Guelph spoke. I had no idea that there was something that close with what I've been told is the second largest collection.
It's the largest collection in the world outside of Scotland. Yeah.
There you go, the largest collection, right at your doorstep, folks. If you have Scottish ancestry, it's just up the road. So we're very pleased to have Daniel with us. He tells me he is a native Windsorite, so all the more pleasure to have him with us, I'm sure. And he's going to tell us a little bit about the Center for Scottish Studies, so that'll give you a better idea of what you might be seeing if you were to arrange to go there. And we're also going to find out a little bit about some of the research that's being done about Scotland and its history, and what's being done at that particular center. So, Daniel, it's yours.
Thanks everyone for coming and for the invitation. Yeah, it's good to be here. It's the first time we've ever talked about history in Windsor. Well, outside of my living room, first time I'm talking about history in Windsor. But I grew up on the West End, and I went to the University of Windsor, and then I went to the University of Guelph for my graduate work. And I'm off to the University of Manitoba next year. But I found out the same way as Jim did about Guelph, having all this Scottish history stuff. I was just looking around and looking for a place to go to school next, and there it was, and the rest is history. So it's been a good place, and the University of Guelph is certainly the best place in Canada or in North America, and probably pretty close to getting there as the best place in the world to do this kind of work. Yeah, so I don't do immigration history necessarily. Well, at all really. I know it, taught it. I spend a lot of time thinking about it. But my real expertise is in 16th century Reformation and religious history of that period. So we might get to a little bit of that at the end, but I'll probably spare you that. But I've taught this material, and I thought a lot, especially with the Scots in Canada. So I'm just going to go through a few things today. So we might not get, like I said, to my research, but who knows? But I will talk a little bit about the Scots in Canada and their kind of unique impression that they made on this country, and then a little bit about what we have at Guelph, which kind of represents that contribution to Canada, and then maybe a little bit of my research at the end. So Scotland is a kind of, well, in Canada, there are very few nationalities that have kind of made the contribution that Scots have made, or just that people carry. So, in 2006 census, 500,000 people just said they were Scottish. They didn't say they were Scottish Canadian. They didn't say they were anything. They said they were Scottish, and they live here. And almost 5 million people claim Scottish heritage somewhere down their line. So you see it everywhere. People say, I'm whatever they say, Italian Scottish, or Jewish Scottish, and you see almost everybody. They'll say at the end something. So it is almost in every family in North America, and but because of that, and because Scotland, as a very small country, has made just a massive contribution culturally to how we think about the world in the West, the tendency is to just kind of think of Scots in big caricatures. So these fake Scottish accents on TV, or these people wearing their tartan all the time. And this is a real part of Scottish life, but it's not what Scots do. They don't all walk around in kilts. we might like them too. But the thing about Scottish demographics, especially, well, I mean almost always, but especially as the 19th century moved on, is the story of the Scottish demographics is a story of loss, almost totally. So Scots, this is the net migration proportion of population. So you have a natural increase that you should have in your country based on births and deaths. And then that rate as a form of migration in Scotland always loses, except in the 1930s, and then since 2003, since they found the North Sea oil, people moved back to Scotland. But primarily, they're always losing people. So it's not a very good story for your nation to kind of understand, like, what's the best thing about Scotland? Leaving it. So this is a part of the Scottish existence, which kind of weighs heavy on the kind of the national consciousness that people always leave Scotland. But they go everywhere. So you'll find Scots everywhere in the world. I was just editing a book and reading about this stuff all the time. But you name it, the place, you'll find little Scottish families, figuring out their lives in the middle of Africa, in New Zealand, in Australia, of course, all over Canada and the U.S., and everywhere in between. So the Scots were everywhere, and it's kind of why in the modern world, Scottish politicians, especially the national parties now, as they kind of move towards independence, are really trying to embrace the Scots in the diaspora, all the Scots all over the world. And there are there's even talk in the Irish do this, that they want people who have a Scottish grandfather to have a vote, in Scotland. The Irish are doing this already, because the only people that can beat the Scots in terms of desperation and leaving the country are the Irish. So that's the way it goes. So there they are, these poor Scottish crofters, sailing west to the prairie lands. That crofter's trail to happiness. So this is what they look like. But kind of in Scottish history, I kind of make everything into a triangle. My students are always telling me that anyway. So I kind of think about how we kind of think about Scottish history. It has, we think of them all as Highlanders, pretty much. They are all left Scotland, pretty much. And they're all in the military, pretty much. So we think of them all in pipe band, marching to bring Canada to Canadians, and they're always leaving, and they always are from this particular, of course, sparsely populated, difficult to live in region of the Highlands. So modern Scottish history doesn't believe this very much anymore, and spends a lot of time obsessing over this idea that all Scotland is in the Highlands, and everyone doesn't wear a kilt. And it doesn't offend me quite as much because I'm Canadian, but it offends Scots, lots of them anyway. No, I don't ever wear a kilt. We used to have at Guelph, we established the first one also outside of the world, a chair in Scottish studies. And this man came, and he was my advisor, and he came from Scotland, and he never owned a kilt in his life. He lived 45 years of his life, or 50 years of his life in Scotland. And then he came to North America. He had to buy two because he was wearing them so frequently, and he's always going to all, getting asked to go to all these events. So this is kind of the way it operates. So it offends some people, and so a lot of the history now is trying to push back against these kind of traditional ways of thinking about Scotland. So there's a tendency to romanticize everything about the Scots. Everybody's family had it terribly, and everybody's worked hard, and then they eventually became rich, and this was a great story. And the one thing that people especially misunderstand about immigration or migration generally is that the people who left and who came to the New World, especially, they were like pretty well off in comparison to the people at home. There were people who were too poor to stay in Scotland, but you had to have some money to leave. And the really poor people, they just died. So you have to have something to leave. And so it's a big important thing to kind of think about that. We tend to think there's these poor people, they had no jobs, and then they left and came to the New World. And that is true, you know, in a lot of ways. But they had to have something to leave, you know, in order to facilitate their leaving. And the true poor, you know, died. So, and then there's of course this terrible legacy in Scotland of the Highland clearances, which some of you probably know about, and this kind of shrinking of, or enlarging of farmland bought out by big rich people in London and in the big cities, and kind of forcing of regular farmers, regular people off their properties, and eventually in Sutherland especially terrible evictions where people are, you know, ripped off their land, and of course, to add insult to injury, replaced by sheep, and all of the sheep are running around on these people's former farms, and it's terrible thing. Now, with what I'm saying about the tendency of people to kind of think that every Scot is a Highlander, there's also, I find more and more now, this tendency to kind of gloss over this terrible chapter in Scotland and world history, in fact, of the clearances, which was real, that people were forced off their land for purely economic reasons. There's some statistics that the money you could get from having a sheep on your land was something like quadruple what you'd have from having 7 tenants or something like that. And of course, you'd always get the money for the sheep, and you might not always get the money from the people. And so almost everybody chose this way, you know, almost everybody chose this. So now I find in history, like, people just don't even talk about it because they want to cover other topics which people haven't traditionally covered. So in here, this is the big fancy book right now on the Scottish diaspora by Tom Devine, who's Scotland's probably most famous historian to the Scotland's global diaspora. There's very, very little about the clearances in there, even though they're just a major, major force for Scottish history. So history is confusing. We'll get to that a lot. Lots of confusion. So, and then this thing, famous Scottish historian Tom Nairn talks about this tartan monster and fighting off the tartan monster. So if you've ever been to Scotland and you go to any of these tourist shops, you'll see all these tartan hats, and you know, whatever your name is, they're going to find you a tartan if you're going to buy it. So if your name is Bellini or something like that, they will find the Rubinstein tartan will be there. So they will. These things are happening all the time still, of course, in Scotland. So people who take history seriously again are offended by this. I mean, again, we'll get to it at the end, but I don't think they should be. So this tartan monster is a very scary thing for Scottish historians, and they try to avoid it. So and Scotland and the Highlands and this idea of like the noble Highlander has persisted for a lot of time, and primarily because of these two people there. I'm sure you know one of them, and we know both of these characters. Robbie Burns on the left, Walter Scott on the right. These two heroes of Scottish literature in the 19th century, always talking about the noble Highlander fighting against the greedy landlord. And of course, Scott arranges for the George IV to come and wear tartan in Scotland the first time a English king or Scottish king too has been there since James VI in the 17th century. He makes his triumphant return in 1822, and they just dress him up in tartan, and he's big. I wish I had a picture. I should have. Big fat man wearing all his tartan, and you know, it's just a spectacle. And so you know, there's this great association always with Queen Victoria, of course, also loved the Scots and loved tartan and loved all this stuff. So the force of these artists especially, again, compounds this idea of the kind of the noble Highlander who's always in the army and then has to leave home because someone was greedy. So, but this man, I think, tells us most about immigration history, and that man is Isaac Newton, and he was not Scottish. But he did say that every object will remain at rest or in uniform motion in a straight line is compelled to change by an external force. And I always say this when my students say they shouldn't know physics, but they should. Because something has to move these people. People, if they have a fat belly and they have all the opportunity that they want and they're going to inherit their father's farm, they will just stay where they are. They will just stay where they are. They always have, and they probably always will. Something has to happen, and things, big demographic changes often happen because of small movements. So when I talk about history, I often ask my students, like, what things we know for certain that people in the 16th, 17th, 18th, 19th century did that we do, you know. And we often think of these people of the past as kind of like, well, a lot of people think of the famous English historian, E.B. Thompson called it the enormous condescension of posterity. The idea that we always think that the people who lived in the past were like worse than us just because they happened to live a couple hundred years ago. Oh, aren't they cute? You know, but they were just almost exactly like you and I in almost every real way. So things that they did that we know for sure, of course, that they did: eat and sleep and work and get married and have sex and go to school. All these things that people did, they're always, with all people. And one thing when I think about the diaspora, and I've only really thought about it a lot over the last couple of years, is that people always moved. They always did. And we tend to think of like migration as very much late, like post Second World War, 20th century migration, or 19th century British Empire migration. But people always moved. I studied these 16th century religious people, and there's just all kinds of Scottish people going to just live in continental Europe all the time. All kinds of Scots in Poland, tons of them. All working in the military or involved in trade or something like that. So people always moved, always. And so there's also this idea that there's these fundamental differences between ethnic groups when there probably isn't, right? So the Scots invented the modern world, the Italians invented Canada, the Greeks invented democracy, and the Irish saved civilization. And I don't know, somebody has another book that I could probably put up there, right? So there's not these essential differences, and it also speaks to our tendency when we're thinking about the past to only think in terms of time period, say 19th or 20th century, or in terms of nationality, which of course are inventions of way later in Western history, 19th, 20th centuries, when nationhood even mattered, and of course now nationhood is starting to matter less and less once again. Okay, so there's this idea we think about people fully assimilated, and the like kind of textbook definition of assimilation is that they no longer identify themselves as Scottish, Canadian, or something like that. They would say, I'm just Canadian. And but then these things come up from time to time. It's like kind of native to human beings, where they have these things like ethnicity needs. You want to be around people who look like you, or speak your language, or play your music, or read your books, or something like that. And so now people are starting to think, well, you can be fully assimilated into North American culture, but still have these things, ethnicity needs. It doesn't prevent you from being a Canadian, but it allows you to be Scottish, or Irish, or Polish, or whatever it is that you are. So I think these kind of things are important. And we shouldn't necessarily always think about the past in terms of time or in terms of region, but maybe you can measure things by someone's job or by their neighborhood or something like that. these are our two famous books that are currently out in Scottish diaspora. The first one there is Tom Devine, and the second one is written by my friend and my old boss. So that one on the left. So buy that one. Don't buy that one. Anyway, but in all these, there's more of these movements towards kind of considering that people, Scottish people in particular, weren't just moving like kind of like on the coattails of the English in Empire, or that they weren't just Highlanders moving. That, like, of course, 90% of this, I don't know if it's 90, but it's pretty close to 90. I think it's probably actually more than that. Lives in that central belt of Scotland, you know, Rick from Glasgow, and of course in the 19th century. I have a statistic here, which I always love to tell people about Glasgow in the 19th century when it was booming. That's like, it was like China is now. You know, everybody built everything in the world in Glasgow, and Singer sewing machines, which like every family had in their house for a couple generations. They're an American company, and they moved to Glasgow in the 19th century, and they had 10,000 employees just in Glasgow in 1900, and these 10,000 people produced 13,000 sewing machines a week in the early 20th century. You know, so when you think of where you get your sewing machine now, you probably don't think Glasgow. I gotta get there. They've got the, but of course this is a like global trade as well. So these are the kind of the present day movements in Scottish history. But of course the mess of history confuses all of these things all the time. So religion can confuse it, economics can confuse it, but of course these transnational identities, you're Scottish and you're Canadian, you're Scottish, Italian and Canadian, you're Scottish, Irish and Canadian, these things all confuse everybody, and there are very few straight lines in history. You know, we can't just say, well, my father was a banker, so I became a banker, my father was whatever, so I became whatever. These are, you know, lives are incredibly complex. And as I always say to everybody, history is a study of context. You just have to boil it down to the smallest unit you can boil it down to, build it up from there, and then try to make some sense of it after you built it up. And so in a broad way, like history as it used to be practiced, traditionally always used to be, we kind of make up this grand narrative of how the world worked, and then we pick the pieces and they fit in perfectly. But now, I mean, it used to be that you would go to the town, so someone would study Windsor, and then they would study Essex, and then they would study Kingston and Guelph and London, and then they would kind of make something more of that. But the kind of work that you people are doing with like families, this is, it was out of fashion for a very long time in history, but it is coming back very big time now, that people are going right down to the family level and saying, these three people were neighbors, this is how they figured out their lives, and by doing this we get a better idea of how Essex County worked, blah, 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 all the way up. So down to the very, family side. And what I mean about the mess of history is how confusing it all becomes, and how confusing especially like identity and things like that become. So this lady here, St. Margaret of Scotland in the 11th century, she was, of course, the king's wife, and she was a very, very devout Catholic. And St. Margaret of Scotland was a patron saint of Scotland. Now, she was really kind of like, in the 11th century, everyone was really concerned with regulating the Catholic liturgy, making sure it was the same everywhere in the world. So they wanted it to be the same in Rome as it was in England, and as it was in Scotland, as it was in Germany, everywhere else. So St. Margaret of Scotland said, you better get in line with how we do this, or get out of here. You know, and the people who got out of there were almost all what we see now as Highland Scots, right? They just said, forget this, I'm not doing this weird thing that you do. We're going to pray, and we're going to do what we always did. And they kind of ran up to the Highlands so they wouldn't bother them. They wouldn't bother them regulating how they had to pray and how they had to do the Mass. So the Highlands kind of got forced out by St. Margaret of Scotland. Yet she was still the Yet she was still the patron saint of the nation, or as it moved on. And this is St. Margaret of Scotland Catholic Church in where my family's from, where I spend a lot of my time, in Broad Cove in Cape Breton. It has about 20 families, but they're good ones. And these people now are almost all completely, totally Highland, descended from Highland Scots. Well, I would say are completely, totally. The original people were all descended from Highland Scots. Now, when these people were naming their church, they weren't thinking like, well, I can't believe what she did to, I can't believe what St. Margaret of Scotland did to us in the 11th century. They were thinking, oh, we're just going to think of the most Scottish thing we can think of and put it on there. And there it is, St. Margaret of Scotland still there, still primarily, Highland Scots in there. And, of course, Scotland primarily, a massive percentage of it, is not a Catholic country by any stretch. At this point would be probably about 90% Presbyterian, and almost all of, totally illegal to be a Catholic in Scotland when this church was established. So they come to the New World, they are Catholics, but they're also Scottish, even though Scottish and Catholic don't go together, and it's just all very confusing. But you can make sense of it if you go to that parish and you start to go through the records, figure out the genealogy, figure out where the families came from, and go from there. So this is kind of how to do history, and it was how I became interested in history and how basically everybody who goes to that church knows all the relatives. But that's just one part of the story in Canada. Of course, there's all these other regions all over the country. Canada Company, this is a fountain that's about, well, I don't live there anymore, but it's about 20 steps from my house in Guelph, and this is where John Galt supposedly cut down the first tree to establish the Canada Company, to establish Guelph, the town. He got these 10,000 square kilometers and basically made so much of Ontario and Huron County especially, and Guelph was the center. John Galt looms large, and his kind of agent on the ground, William Tiger Dunlop, if you've ever been to Goderich, Ontario, the home of my lovely wife, that is he made Goderich. And here's Goderich. This is the plan for Goderich. Here, that Galt thought this is how we should design Goderich. And if you ever drive in Goderich, this is how I always tell my wife. That's not a square. But that's what they say. Go meet him at the square. And if you're me, I've been going there for a long time, but I've got to know a lot of wrong streets over time. I'll go down this one. My wife lives like over here. So sometimes I'll go down this one, and I'll go down that one. And then they had the tornado there a few years ago, and they changed where the new businesses. So I had it right for a few years, and then darn tornado really for me. But anyway, so this is Goderich, and they said, we're going to make these kind of radials, and they're going to go out like this. And there's also this kind of myth around that this was the original plan for Guelph, and then Guelph was going to be too big, so they thought Goderich was going to be the size of Guelph, and Guelph was the size of Goderich, so they moved this plan. They said it was for a bigger town. And this is Edinburgh, Newtown, Edinburgh. This is the old town here with just kind of haphazard old grid, and where people just stayed kind of where they settled. But the new town was kind of a rationalized scheme for how we should organize towns. And Scotland was famous for like being at the forefront of this kind of urban plan.
When was Newtown in Edinburgh?
This is 1829, or 1834. This one.
And they're following Goderich.
Pardon?
They're following.
No, that's just when the map was. They were here before. Yeah, but no, maybe my wife would say that. Yeah, but this is kind of the all over Canada. You see these direct influence of these Scottish people. Bonnecourt, Ontario. It's kind of near Kingston. this is how you know the Scottish have influence. Aberdeen, they didn't even pick Aberdeen, they picked the motto for Aberdeen as the name of the place. What is the motto for the river and the land sustain us, right, for Windsor? That's like if we move somewhere else and we established a town called that, the river and the land sustain us. But almost everybody who went there was from Aberdeen, and this is it's called chain migration. You write back, you call your neighbor and say, come on over, everything, the getting's good here in Bonaccord, and come on down. They all come, and almost everybody ends up from there. Glengarry County, very similar. After the Highlanders went to Nova Scotia, kind of land was all taken, and they end up going to Glengarry County. The later Highland people end up in Ontario, Glengarry County. These are interesting ones, at least for me. Killarney and Saltcoats. Killarney in modern day Manitoba. Saltcoats in modern day Saskatchewan. Now, these were like a subsidized scheme to settle families, usually crofting families who were poor. These are from Outer Hebrides, and they go to Killarney, Manitoba, and the next year they go to Saltcoats. And what happens to these families is Killarney thrives. The people in Killarney do great. And the people in Saltcoats basically abandon the settlement after 1 year. So, much later on, well, 30 years later, they do a survey. This is a genealogical survey of Manitoba Archives. And they say, what happened? Like, why did you guys do it? And the people at Saltcoats unable to thrive. And they said, had they just stuck it out, remained on their homesteads, they might ultimately have had the same success that they have in Killarney. They were led away by bad advice. Many of them did not realize the position in which they were placed or the opportunities open to them. Pardon me? Oh, sorry, this is the establishment was in, I think it's 1888 in Killarney. And yeah, 1888, and this is in 1901. 20 years or 15 or 13 years after this was done. So, why do you think these things would be maybe unreliable?
Next generation.
It's the next generation, and what do we know about them? Probably wealthier. They're there still.
New equipment had been developed.
Sure, there's all kinds of reasons, and they're there and the other people aren't. So they think, oh, if they were just tough like us, they would have made it. But they all wimped out, and they all just left. Now, we don't know what happened to these Saltcoats people. They maybe went to Toronto and they're all rich, right? Or they maybe went to somewhere else and got a bigger, better farm, and their relatives are wealthy somewhere else. But what do you think might happen to them? Like, for sure, I was reading the thing one time with these people, they said, for sure they were better off than what they were in Scotland. At the very least, they could find work as a laborer on a farm or somewhere else. But there's no way of really marking what could have saved them or what couldn't. Now, there's Saltcoats in Scotland, on the water, and there's Saltcoats in Saskatchewan. That's not water, of course, underneath that blue. And so there's all these kind of things as well, right? The haphazard placing of people in the New World. Look, you're going to get a bunch of land, and you're going to be rich. Well, they didn't know how to do it. These people were all fishermen, and they didn't know how to live, on a farm. There's all these stories of in the 19th century, all these letters of female domestics coming to the New World, and these people writing back to the guy who they paid to pay the passage of these people say, she can't cook, and all she wants to do is go to the movies. So they're saying, like, you sent this person here to be a domestic, and they can't do any of these things. But everyone was just saying, yep, no problem, I'll take it, I can cook, no problem. And then they couldn't do the work. So there was a lot that had to, we also tend to think that everybody who lived in the 19th century was a farmer, but they weren't, of course. And everybody could fish, but they couldn't. And so you had to a lot had to go right for your people to thrive in the new world. Now, religion was also a big mover of people, as it continues to be today. And so in Nova Scotia, I think frontier religion is about the most telling aspect of Scottish religion that we can kind of speak of now. If you think about especially very hardline Scottish Presbyterianism from the 17th century, 18th century, these people are literally the direct descendants or the forefathers of American evangelical movement, Billy Graham, of all these preachers in the United States. The Great Awakening were almost all Scots on the frontier, and a huge portion of these Scots had been basically forced out of the traditional church in Scotland because they would kind of freak people out, and then they went to Ulster, and then they kind of didn't get along with people there, and then they moved to the New World, and they were always on the frontier until the frontier ran out. So all the Great Awakening was just basically evangelical Christians moving across the United States, state after state after state after state, having these revivals in tents. The people I'm interested in are these kind of frontier Catholics, and they came to North America, usually as part of this Glen Allendale settlement that came to PEI, and these were Catholics who settled around Charlottetown. And when they came, they had all been, underground. Catholicism was illegal in Scotland. They had all been kind of underground Catholics in Scotland and up in the Highlands, kind of hiding away under the bushes. And then they came to the New World where they could practice freely, especially in Canada. And these people came under the jurisdiction of a French archbishop who did not like them, thought they were very odd, and talked about their indecorous religion. So this would be up there in Charlottetown, kind of where the Glen Allendale settlement is. And then all lots of Scottish Catholic Highland settlement, basically from Pictou up here, all the way up to about Shettycamp on the west coast of Cape Breton. Here's the indecorous religion. Only a priest brought up in Scotland would ever think of celebrating the sacred mysteries with the trash that is found here. The chalice, the gold-plated copper, and in other places, only tin. Most of the chapels have never any of the things you use to celebrate the Catholic Mass. In Port Hood, Cape Breton, where my brother has a house, a boat sail has been spread around the roof. The altar was a cotton canopy. If this chapel was indecent because of its shape, it was more so because of the multitude of dogs within it, and the battling and bawling of 40 or more children in their mother's arms. Several mothers spanked their children noisily to prevent them crying, but the remedy only made them cry. Now, as a father of a child who cries in church, I can tell you, I've learned I don't do it. These are the first people against spanking. This is in the 19th century. But all of this, they kept on going. They, celebrated Mass for 44 persons, and the animals grazing all around Port Hood. But they called these people, or people around Nova Scotia anyway, called these people the heather priests, and they called them that because they were kind of hiding out in the heather of Scotland. They were almost all Gaelic speaking, and they were all trained and ordained secretly, and they always went to the people. This was the idea that there was no church, so you had to go to the people. And when they settled, well, here's where the secret Catholic seminary in Scotland, the Highlands. This is where they had their secret seminary. Now, and then Angus MacEachern becomes the first bishop of Charlottetown. They finally get away from these scary French
bishop who doesn't like them. And he comes to serve in this Benaldale settlement. There aren't very many priests, but there's some, and they almost all speak Gaelic. And what I think is really interesting about this is, again, how we kind of, religion seems a bit passé to some people, but of course it's the center of everything that we do as human beings and movements of people throughout history. And what McCacken did is he told everybody who lived in here, who were Catholic, to move to the coast, because he was the bishop and he had to see them, and he could only sail his boat all the way along here. It took too much time if he had to get off and get into every little parish there. So if you look now, almost totally along the coast, from Pictou to Margery Forks, you see up there, it's almost everywhere on the coast is Highland Scottish Catholic family tradition, because he told them to move. Yeah. So that's how religion affects settlement. I mean, it's so explicit, it's funny. So, there's some Scottish history, but now I'll talk to you about what you actually want to know about. So, at Guelph, like I said, we do have all the material of the best Scottish material, best collection, and this is not just us saying this, we really do have the best collection of Scottish material outside of Scotland in the whole world. Now, how this happened is funny. But this man, Stanford Reed, who is William Stanford Reed, who is a very staunch Presbyterian minister, who was also a professor, and he was teaching at McGill at Presbyterian College there, and he taught in Princeton, and he was kind of a fancy academic. And then when they were establishing the university at Guelph, they needed somebody to run the history department. And he said, I'll do it. So he came to Guelph. And when Reed gets there at Guelph, they wouldn't let him, he was kind of an up and, well, not an up and coming, but a senior academic, a good academic, so we wanted to have graduate students. And all the other universities said, you can't, they didn't want competition, so they said, you can't have graduate studies at Guelph, not allowed in history. And so he said, what if I did it in Scottish studies? And they said, sure, nobody has that. And so they allowed him to do it. And then he just ran with it. And they had lots of money. That was very different times. They had lots of money at the university, and they just basically wrote him a blank check to go all through Scotland, sending his minions all across Scotland to get material. And so even now, if I go to Scotland to an archive and they say, where are you from? From Guelph. They all take their materials and stand back a little bit because they know I'm coming for it. But all of these, he did this everywhere. He got all these family histories, all these rare books, chapbooks, all 19th century ship lists. It's incredible the amount of stuff. Now, I did a whole PhD at Guelph and a master's degree, and I went to Scotland 4 times. In the 20 or in the 1950s, if you were doing a PhD in Scottish history, you probably lived in Scotland for 2 years. But he got so much stuff that I never had a book that we didn't have. You'd be reading the book and you'd be looking in the footnotes for the other book this guy's talking about, and there was never a book that we didn't have. It was just always there. So it was a great place to work. And so they did this. Stanford Reed ran this thing. Everybody, I studied kind of in the 17th century, Catholic resistance to the Reformation and to these. Everyone says that Stanford Reed knew what you were doing. He turned it over in history. I don't think so. Anyway, so I'll talk about the bottom one first, which is the kind of relationship that we have with the Scottish Studies Foundation in Toronto. And this is what's, I think, the best part of our program and what has kind of allowed it to continue as long as it has. These are people a lot like you, people interested in their Scottish heritage, and in Toronto they just went on major fundraising over probably 30 years, just regular people who were interested in their Scottish heritage, and they fundraised, I think it was almost $2 million to establish this chair in Scottish studies. And scholarships and travel bursaries. So almost every student who comes in there, we have a lot,
people coming from Scotland to study at Guelph because the material is just as good. They all get, like, you know, we all get paid trips to Scotland in the summer. This is all, regular people have funded this for us, and it's amazing. And we have a talk at Guelph campus, and usually if there's like academic talks, it's just a bunch of professors sitting there. And at Guelph, we have like tons of people from the community all the time. People driving from Toronto, from Hamilton, just to go to a regular Scottish history talk. So people are very interested in it, and we're hoping that it can all continue. But everyone has kind of worked really hard to make this relationship between Scottish studies and the outside world. So, but there's two big projects they have now. This People in Motion project and this 1871 census project. They're doing the entire 1871 census in Canada and in Scotland. And they're digitizing the whole thing, compiling lists so the big massive set of data can kind of speak to each other. And they find out fascinating things, and one of my good friends is kind of in charge of it. So this is what they do. They make this census record into this census record. And then they can kind of compile it a lot better, go through these materials a lot faster. So sometimes I'll say, I got this relative, I don't know, blah, blah, and my friend will just look it up at his desk, you know, tell me about my relatives. It's scary, but, so, you know, they do, this is he did a presentation one time, and he gave me a couple of the materials on his family, whose last name is Ross. So, there's Hugh Ross up there. He's born in Scotland, of course, all his children born in Canada, right when they kind of make it. And of course, you can find out all kinds of material about these people in this way. And what can the census tell us? You could mark change over generations, which is of course the biggest thing. You could get at a whole bunch of people in a way that you can't with individualized histories. And we can trace the timing of the migration. If this guy has his children in Scotland, or if he has his children in Canada, all this material is there. And you know, they found out all this stuff that large people, that young men come after 1900 and its families in the 1870s and 1880s. And you know, it kind of teaches us, like, we don't think there's much of a difference culturally or socially between kind of Canada now and Canada 30 years ago. But this is only 30 years, and you mark the shift of families coming, the individuals coming. These are kind of very major changes in how your whole country is going to work and how immigration settlements are going to work, and this kind of things happen. Movement to earlier marriages, which they mark, you know, waning commitment to religion after these people leave Scotland, when Scotland would have a much more forceful culture of Presbyterianism, where Canada people wouldn't have the infrastructure to really force you to do anything. So here's occupational change, again, over time. This is my friend's father here, future bank manager. On the right, tailor. On the left, farmer. In the middle, future bank manager. But here you can see, young Scottish men in 1871, 44% farmers, and then slowly these numbers decline. And of course, there's a corresponding increase in people who are working in labor or in manufacturing. And why do you think that would be? Probably because the land is all gone, the world is urbanizing, you know, there's not as many opportunities for young farmers. Okay, so again, these are not massive periods of time, but these are very stark differences in how the world is functioning, right? And we also always have kind of theories about how these things work, but it's important to not have theories, to spark them. And another really interesting thing that I think that they do is they talk about soldiering all the time. And they did these massive data set of the soldiers in Canada and the United States. And of course, these attestations, you know, have people's religion on it, they have people's weight, they have people's height, their fathers and mothers and all this kind of stuff. And so what Andrew did is he studied all the weight of the soldiers in Scotland and the Scottish soldiers in Canada, and found out
that the people who lived in Canada were healthier because they lived in Canada. It was a better place to live. There was more for them to eat. They were in better shape. They worked on farms. They worked in like slums of Glasgow. So the Scots born in Britain weighed 134 pounds. And the Scots born in Canada weighed 147 pounds, and which was very similar to the Canadians born in Canada. And the Scots born in Britain weighed 139 pounds at different ages, right? And these are exactly the same, the Scots and the Canadians. But a fundamental difference in stature of the soldiers. Height, not as much. But immigrants were atypical, right? They were hungrier and they thrived in this in the new environment. So this is kind of what they do by, again, you read back against the grain of these statistics to try to find things other than what they're actually telling us straight away. So, I mean, genealogists, and it's a valuable thing, they're trying to find who make family trees, but they're trying to do more than that as well, where they're trying to create historical knowledge. Now, but sometimes we mess it up. These record keepers, this is my favorite one. Something George something. Something, what you call them. So, you know, we're not, all these people in the past aren't perfect. We may like them, but, you know, they're not perfect. So, the Scottish collection, well, for genealogists, there's a lot of material. Now, I didn't think there was going to be as many of you as there are. So I've got about, I think there's 14 or 15 of each. This is info on the Scottish collection. There's two sides, I see paper. This is information on the Scottish collection, and this is stuff about genealogy generally in the Guelph archive. And they're all very helpful there, so feel free to take that if you'd like. Now, there's all kinds of incredible material. And it's not the straight statistical data of censuses and birth and death records. They're pretty readily available online for particular regions, but all the other material, like family histories that people are writing, accounts from farms. My friend does he does like rural taverns. So he marks like where a farmer goes and trades his like grain for beer at this place, and then goes to this other place and does the same thing. So there's a lot of this kind of work going on. But the records there, Guelph is especially great with Scottish stuff and rural Ontario material. This is what Guelph does. These Tweedsmuir histories, I don't know if any of you know what that is. It is Women's Institute. My wife, she transcribed each and every one of these, typed them all out when she was doing her master's degree. The Tweedsmuir histories are all there. It's basically the main archive for the Women's Institute. Farm and church records for all kinds of counties. They're listed there. For the Scottish material, it's diaries and letters, and all of that, I have my students kind of go through, and they're going through and finding letters, say, very cold here, but they're naming people, you know, they say, wish Grandma could come soon, or wish, Uncle Bill will come. There's lots of opportunity for him. So it's not your straightforward material for genealogists, but I would say there's lots in there for the people who are willing to look for it. And the other thing I want to say, especially about the archivists, is sometimes it's scary for people who kind of don't spend a lot of time in archives. Well, you people all probably do. But to go there and to deal with these people who are sometimes not very nice. But people like Guelph are very nice. And all you have to do is ask them, and they live for it. They want you to ask them. I'll say, I'm doing my course, and I'll kind of go in scared and say, oh, I was wondering if you could find this thing. I would like to use it in my classroom. And they say, oh, yes, no problem. They all find it, and they bring it to you, and they do it better than you ever would yourself. So it's their job, and they want to do it. Yes?
Is it good to let them know you're coming?
Yes, 100%, totally. Anytime you go to an archive, let them know. Like you were saying, like, people just show up at an archive and say, my family is from Scotland. I was wondering if you could tell me about them. And this is why sometimes genealogists get a bad name in the archive, but not from me. But it's not really serious genealogists like you people. It's like people who say, oh yeah, my uncle was, they get to Scotland on a vacation. They say, actually, my uncle was from here. And then they go to the library and say, do you have Uncle Jerry? And so, anyway, this is kind of the stuff that they have. Now, it is a great collection. The Scottish stuff, you'll have, especially like general histories of Scotland, or they have all this material from old, I find the names, I can, there are like 20 names that are very, very popular in 16th century Glasgow, for instance. And if you're in Glasgow and you're reading the paper, it's freaky, but you still see those same surnames 500 years later. They're almost exactly the same. So don't trust the Elgin stones. Anyway, other stuff that we do at Guelph is we have this Guelph series of Scottish Studies. You can also become, there's a membership of, I think, the Scottish Studies Foundation. I think it's $25 for a whole year. And you get the journal sent to your house, which is probably worth $25 in itself. And we have a fall colloquium, which is all Scottish, and a spring colloquium in Toronto. We have a fall one in Guelph and a spring one in Toronto. These are big conferences, and there's lots of good stuff, and there's book sales there, and all kinds of nice stuff for Scottish people. So there's 3 books that we have out now in this Guelph series in Scottish Studies. First one there is associational culture, so St. Andrew's societies and Burns societies and Burns suppers all over the world. There's stuff in there on Canada, on New Zealand, Australia, Africa, all kinds of stuff. And this one is about national identities. This was done by my boss in the middle there, Elizabeth Ewer. And then this one we just released by me and my friend Stuart McDonald. And this one's about Scottish religion. So I only have 3 of them here, and they cost $30, but we can give it to you for $25 if somebody wants to buy one of those. But if you don't, if I run out because you all just really want to read it so badly, you can get them from the Guelph Scottish website as well, or just ask me, or you can call. We have actually the other thing the Scottish Studies Foundation does is it funds an office there, so there's somebody sitting there by a phone waiting for you to call and order books anytime. Now, for Scottish genealogists, the big one is this second one there, Scotland's People. And it is just unbelievable. 90 million records, basically every birth, death, marriage, everything in Scotland. Now, if you're from maybe not all of them. If you're from like the Isle of Eight, like my family, it's not there. But later on it would be, but in the 18th century, not as much. But this is the place to look. You just put in the surname. It's all there, and if you know roughly the region. Again, this is an activity of the Scottish government, and they are there. They really want you to help them. One time, I had to take over this disc. It was like a CD of all kinds of Scottish people in Canada. Like these are descendants, and the Scottish government wanted it, and we had it at Guelph. This was their national history. We had it, and they paid half of my flight just to carry this CD. And then I would say, I'll drop it in the mailbox. They said, no, you have to meet us. It was like we were smuggling drugs or something like that. So I gave it to them in the corner. Anyway, yeah, sorry.
My great-grandfather's brother from Toronto sent my grandfather genealogy on the family, and he went back even to great-grand. So I'm at 1760.
Yeah, that's good.
So would there be church records that I could get here?
Some of them, I do I think some church records, definitely. I'm not sure how, I think it depends on your parish, for sure. If it's Edinburgh, Glasgow, Paisley, probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say, I'm not positive about this, but I, all the time, look at baptism records that are right in front of me from 1565 in Glasgow. And Glasgow's not.
Was it true like there was wars and churches were burned and that sort of thing? Or?
And records lost, you mean?
Yeah.
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, for sure. Like, for instance, Glasgow, my PhD, I did Glasgow records, and then the Presbyterian Church has the church session, then the Presbyterian, then General Assembly, and there's like different levels of it. So there was only, I think, maybe 5 years in the entire 16th century where you have Kirk session, Presbytery, generally you have all of them. So sometimes you're just working with the Presbytery, you can kind of see what happens in the Kirk session by looking at the Presbytery, or you can see what's going up to the Presbytery by looking at the Kirk session, but full records are, they're not an obstacle either, no.
So when you have the notes in Guelph,
Of the church records, it depends on what, I mean, Paisley, I would say just look it up, the whole thing is online, or you could just ask one of those librarians and they'll tell you. I'm not, Hayes, like from the 17th, or from the 18th century, I wouldn't be shocked. I know we have a book, the other thing, in the 19th century, all these people were very concerned with Scottish history, started these, it would be pretty similar to this, they started these clubs, like the Bannatyne Club and the Spalding Club, and there's all these clubs, and what they did is just compile documents. And they would compile the entire Glasgow Presbytery records from 1801 to 1850, and then do another volume in the 1850 to 1900 or something like that. So these things exist, and these people just painstakingly did all these. So you might have to look.
yeah.
The other place is archive.org. Do you ever look at those? If you archive.org, they say there's more information on archive.org, like all these old books, and there's more information on archive.org than all of the libraries in the world, right? Times whatever amount. It's incredible, the amount of stuff. So yeah, they have lots of stuff too. Now, and for fun, then you're not going to get much genealogy out of the Scottish Diaspora blog or the Scottish Diaspora Tapestry, but they're fun. And especially the Diaspora blog, it's run by a good historian, Buellman, and the Scottish Diaspora Tapestry, I don't know if any of you have heard of that, but they're asking basically every place in the world where they have Scottish communities to make a little piece of the tapestry, and they can attach it to a big exhibition, which is going on right now for 2014. Okay, we'll leave this part. We won't go into my research. We'll just I ask you a question. But this is what I deal with in my whole life. These are 16th century Glasgow Kirk session records, and they're very hard to read. I'll show you. There's one of them a little bit. This is the handwriting, so that takes forever to kind of learn. That took me about 6 months.
read that.
Oh yes, yeah. So this is what it says. So this is it written down. This is it in Scots, which is, you can kind of figure it out. You can try. And this is me translating it. So the session, this is what they kind of did. This is the Kirk session. This is how they're punishing sinners. And the session ordains and decides that a cart should be provided next week, that this day, 7 days, to cart throughout this town sundry harlots and ungodly persons, but especially Elaine Wood, adulteress with William Reed and other ungodly persons who shall be banished from the society of those that serve the name of God. And so
now you know who they are.
yes, exactly. But I'm saying, if there are lots of names like this, it's hard to trace people back to this, but I sometimes talk, whenever you get the ultimate combination is if you get like a real historian who's also obsessed with genealogy. I was talking to a guy at a conference one time. He's a very fancy historian, and sometimes they say, oh, they don't care about their. But this guy traced his Swedish ancestors to like the 11th century. He had it all documented, and it was real. Like sometimes you go to these like Scottish clubs, and they say everybody was like a servant of Mary Queen of Scots or something like that. And on your thing, like he had it for real. And this is a later one, but anyway, what they would do with the sinners eventually is they'd make this cart, and then they would take the cart. They would take the cart and they'd make them. So this is like 3 sessions, right? So 1586, June 30th, and 2 weeks later, July 14th, and then August 3rd, a few years later, when she strikes again being a harlot in the town. So what they would do is they'd get a cart, and they'd put her in like a dung cart, but it wasn't a dung cart, it was specifically made to move these sinners. And there's the church at the top, like Glasgow Cathedral. Some of you that have been to Glasgow, you would probably go to that. Glasgow Cathedral, they take them in the cart, this poor woman, and they'd make her wear a paper hat that said fornicator on the front of it, and they would take her in the cart all the way through the town, and take her down to the Clyde, which is here, dunk her head in the water, and then take her all the way back through the town. So part of my research talks about like how is the kind of is a redefinition of the town before redefinition of space and time is kind of what I think about. Like in the Catholic Church, you never have to spend nearly as much time at church, but in the like early Presbyterian Church, you'd be there for like it's a full-time job, like 25 hours a week or something like that. You go prayers on Wednesdays, sermons last like 6 hours on Saturday and Sunday. So, you know, that has thankfully died off a bit. Anyway, well, that's that.
They converted?
Yeah, some of them did convert probably, yeah. So anyway,
William Reed.
yeah, exactly, yeah. So I'll take any questions, yeah, if you have any of them. Yeah.
This year, in Amherstburg, Scotland, they have an Angus Four there, and they got a hold of 3 of us. We have more information on the Model Pioneer,
Yeah.
and they wanted us to share the information because they have no record of us here in Canada.
Yeah, I believe that. That's what the homecoming did. They do the big homecoming. They did it, I think it was first in 2010 or 2012, something like that. And they're doing it again this year. This is 2014 is a big year, 700 years
We
since
put on a cutoff date of 1910.
Yeah,
We sent the information over. This is what 100,000 needs to watch.
really.
They valued our information at 1.7 million pounds.
Really?
We
Yeah.
never got any of it, but
Yeah. That's because you're dealing with the Scots.
we were invited to go there too, but to pay our own expense.
Yeah, well, again, that's what I say to the I give presentations at Scottish people, and we're trying to
There's a
sell
file
books.
here for you.
Oh, okay, great. And they say, you know, I said, come on, just put your Scottish heritage aside for a moment.
Pay my expenses.
Yeah, exactly.
When I was in Scotland, I picked up several books and got home and read them, of course. And it said that it was written, one was written in first person, interviewing people. And he said, I saw them take her by her long red hair and throw her aboard the ship.
Yeah, yeah.
Because they came over as slaves or
Sure.
slaves or
Yeah.
indentured, whatever.
Oh, yeah, and being red hair, I
And
mean,
they use the same ships that they used for bringing the African slaves.
oh, yes.
over.
Yeah, well, I mean, the indentured servants, see, I mean, it was different because it became less, because it was not about race primarily. And of course, there's all these theories on slavery that happened, where it's kind of like the invention of race with the slavery, because that was how they could really tell them apart from the Irish and the Scotch who were indentured servants. But the indentured servants, like the people in like Barbados, you know, Redlegs, even those people didn't have it very good, and they still don't, all descendants of
John's grandmother came to Amherstburg,
Yeah.
indentured.
Yeah, oh yeah.
I guess
Probably
they
a
called them
lot of people.
slaves.
Yeah, a lot of people. I mean, it's not, it wasn't fun, certainly, to be an indentured servants, and the contracts were long. They were the same kind of thing. You'd get kind of tricked when you were just thinking you were going to get out of it, and you save your, you know, $30 to finally get
Sounds
free.
like the
And
Bible.
yeah, no, that wasn't in the Bible.
You got to marry the daughter. or
Yes,
daughter.
yeah.
That was-
Yeah.
Another question in the back.
Yeah.
Was there much traveling back and forth once you came from Scotland to Canada?
Well, like back home.
Yes.
Yeah, there's an interesting thing. That's another thing I kind of talk about in my class on this a little bit more, is that we tend to always think of just a straight shot. And there was a lot of return migration. And I think one of the big groups that we underestimate the return migration is the soldiers. We just think of the soldiers coming to the New World, marrying a Canadian, and staying here forever. The people who went home the most were the Orkney people, who all went out west with the Hudson's Bay Company, all around White Beach or home in Winnipeg. But a lot of them came, and they were great workers for Hudson Bay Company, but it's something, I don't know whether it was racist or what it was, but they were very rarely allowed to the Orkney people really advance in the Hudson's Bay Company. So they got, it seemed like it kind of worked out in the end for both of them, so they could come home and buy a house with what they had done happy with that, so they could buy some land in Orkney, and that was good. It's good for them. But there was a lot more return migration than we tend to think, and there was that with the female servants, less so, but definitely.
But would you go back to see your relatives?
I don't think.
And then return to Canada?
It's too expensive, too expensive. There would be, you know, there just wrote letters, and I would say there'd be, I think there's one story, I don't know where I was reading that the guy came home. This was a kind of a story about the soldiers especially. They came home and they never thought everyone was going to love them so much. Like they became kind of famous people in the town after they had gone out and they'd seen America, and then they came home and they had intentions to go on to Australia or go on somewhere else, but then everything was great at home, everybody loved them, and they didn't have to buy their pints, so that was fine.
Did the church bring many wives over, girls over to marry?
No, the church, there's so many orphans, that was a big thing in kind of Glasgow, and especially the bigger towns, they send groups of orphans, and maybe that was partially the intention in that. But not, like I don't know this as well as other people do, but the idea of just like sending women to marry the men was not necessarily something that I know about or that I even saw or would suspect. I would suspect men primarily, and then the women as servants, and when they were single, and then they might marry each other, but that would just be kind of luck. Yeah.
Would there have been a certain time period when they would have sent orphans over, or would it have just been?
There's the two big ones. What's his name? The famous one. I have it somewhere in here. There's the two. There was the one in Glasgow, and they went to Brockville, Ontario. There's a house there for them. It's just slipping my mind. Bernardo this was the idea, the same idea as the Bernardo children. Some of those were Scots, but
What time period did you?
this to early 20th century, late 19th century. Yeah.
Would that have been the warriors?
Yes. Yes, it would have been warrior.
Ah.
Yeah. Yeah. Warrior. That's it.
You talked about military men returning to the homeland. Would they have been, when they finished, would they have been given a moderate sum of money, like pay you out?
It depends.
Because then they might have been sort of rich when they returned home.
Yeah, I think the thing that people are finding more is like in their letters, they were more famous than rich. And so they were like kind of cultured people who had come back and kind of seen the world. They had some money in their pockets in comparison to, but there wasn't like this pension or anything like that.
No, I'm surprised that retiring soldiers wouldn't have gotten pension, but I would have thought that they might have not been paid out their salary every day, every week, and might have gotten a payout of an extra £100 or something.
Yeah, I mean, there would be something like that.
Yeah.
But I mean, not enough to sustain them for a life.
No, but enough to maybe get you home and set you up with a house or something.
Yeah, possibly. I wouldn't.
I'm just curious.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt that. I wouldn't doubt that. Yeah.
Was there a time in Scotland where you had to register a birth, especially in an illegitimate birth?
Well, yeah. I mean, from the 16th century, they're always doing that all the time.
But was that civil or church?
No, church. Yeah, but see, there's not much difference in the civil records. The thing is, if you look back against the church records, that's where you see all the dirt, because that's the people who are seeking it out. So I find the most awful one. I mean, we're always talking about how awful a Kirk session was, all the people spying in your window and doing all this stuff. The worst one I ever saw was these people had to go and imagine these, middle-aged men who were in the Kirk session had to go and try to draw breast milk from the woman because they suspected that she had a child in the house that she wasn't telling everybody about. Like go over to Mary's house and see if her breasts are producing milk. And if they are, get her over here right away. Because it's just crazy. And this is just like 30 years in Glasgow. You can find this.
And the women put up with this.
Well, no, they didn't. But there's always, I have part of my research is all these women who hated the ministers so much. So I'm always trying to find out whether they hated the ministers because they were like secretly Catholic, or they became Catholic because they hated the ministers
Yeah.
so much. You don't really,
Which is worse?
And especially at that generation where there was the change, like you don't know whether these people were secretly always Catholic or whether they just hated this kind of way so much that they said, forget it, we're gonna become like secret Catholic.
Well, that's famous in small town Ontario. Your minister comes to town, you know, like his preaching, so you go join the other church.
Sure, yeah, that's still happening a lot. But they had that, well, you see that, like people who miss church, people who don't register the children, people who have been living together before they're married, they're always doing this. You know, the Kirk session does get a bad name, especially for the marriage thing, because people are always saying they're always after people who are, but they wanted marriage. You know, so if you were living with somebody before you were married, they would say, you know, shame on you, but now you're married. You know, they would marry them right away, and they'd say, because they wanted like this big thing in early Calvinism, they wanted the family union. But I mean, for birth, baptisms, you can find all that kind of stuff. It depends on where you're actually looking with the registers for baptism. I'm not sure the actual date when they first started registering them civilly, but you can find lots of baptisms in the 16th century on the records, especially for the bigger places. Edinburgh was bigger than Glasgow at that stage. But it depends how long you're talking. But if you're in the 19th century, I would say from 1801, there will almost surely be baptismal records for every person.
See, I was looking for my family where there is this one, so the woman's name is given, but not the father's name.
Yeah.
And then the child was adopted by my relative.
Yeah.
So I've been trying to find out where.
Yeah, that's a tough one. That's a tough one, especially because those kind of things, if you even think about that now and you're reading in the paper about people who are adopted, how hard it is now.
The library will be closing in 30 minutes. If you need a library card, please come to the.
Yeah, so we can all get our library card. But anyway, those things are like very, especially when they're like on purpose, secretive, you know, that it's like if they're trying to hide something from you. I always think about these people. Like I read, I feel like I know all these little details, and I think this guy is a jerk and this guy is nice, and I've seen them for 20 years getting their children baptized or yelling at the minister, or, you know, I think I would like this person and I would like that other person. But then I also think, like, if I read all your baptismal records, how could I possibly know whether I would like you or not? But, you know, I don't know. You just make up kind of stories in your own mind. But I think if you're looking for things that people wanted to be secret, they're probably going to remain secret, you know. Anyway,
Thank you very much. And you have given us a fascinating and very informative presentation this evening. Everybody is very much into what you have to say, and I have a suspicion that there's going to be a little bit of a movement down the highway.
yes, good, and do it. And if you, if any of you are ever wondering, or I could send you my email or just contact. They also have an email. It's pretty easy to find just by googling, but it's Scottish@UO Guelph. So it's very easy to find the Scottish people at Guelph. You just go and talk to anybody, and they'll say, "Oh, go over there." So,
Daniel, thank you very, very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.